Welcome back. In this course, until now, we have created a number of resources, and all these resources were based on the to do hard coded service. This data is stored as a static to do list, and it's time to change that. Let's take this and put all the data in the database. We would be using H2 as the in-memory database. We would be using JPA and Spring Data JPA. If you are new to JPA or Spring Data JPA, I would really recommend you to look at the section Introduction to JPA. We have a section in the appendix introducing you to JPA, Spring Data JPA, what is H2, what are the advantages of H2, and all that fun stuff. That section is a prerequisite to be able to understand what's happening in the background with this specific step and the subsequent steps where we use JPA to connect the to-do resource to a database. One of the things that we would do is first let's stop the server. We would need to make a few changes. So I would stop the server. The approach we would take is we would create a parallel to-do JPA resource. So we would let this resource be there and we would create a parallel resource to do JPA resource, and we would append JPA to each of the URLs. I'll remove this out, but that's the approach that we would be taking. We'll create a parallel JPA resource exposing a new set of URIs, and slowly we will connect the front end to the new set of URIs. In this step, let's focus on getting the database up and running and populating the database with some initial set of data. The awesome thing with JPA, Hibernate, Spring Data JPA, and the Spring Boot combination with H2 is the fact that as soon as you create an entity, it would create the database in memory automatically. Let's see that in action in this specific step. Let's get started now. I'm opening up the to-do.java. The annotation I would need to add is @entity. Control space, and this would become a entity which should be stored into the database. Any entity in JPA needs to have a primary key. I need to add a @id annotation. Control space, and there you go. This becomes the ID. One of the other important things is ID fields ideally should be a wrapper class. It's not suggested to have a primitive because typically null indicates that an entity is not yet stored to the database, and when you use that entity and save it to the database, it means it has to be inserted. So what we are doing is we are making this long. As soon as you make this long, you should see a few compilation errors. Let's fix them. We'll start with changing the get ID to long and set ID to long, and you'd see that the to do hard coded service has an error. Let's go there and let's fix that. So this is set ID is giving a compilation error. What I'll do is I'll change the counter to long. Once you change the counter to long, everything should compile. Now I'll go back to the to do service. Now what we'll focus on is we'll add a fact that this ID, I would want it to be auto generated. I don't want to set the value of the ID. Whenever a new to do is created, we would want to make it auto generated. The way you can do that is by adding an annotation called generated value. What happens is a sequence would be created and the sequence would be used to set values into the ID. So whenever you add a new to do, the sequence will be used to generate the ID and set the value for it. Now we have the entire entity set up. Now if you are wondering how did we get all these annotations @entity, @id, @generated value, the answer is when we were creating this project, we already added in a couple of dependencies. The first one which we added in was Spring Boot Starter Data JPA. On Spring Starter project, we selected Data JPA, and that's how we get this. And we also selected H2. That's how we have all the frameworks, JPA, Hibernate, and Spring Data JPA available to us. If all this seem like a lot of buzzwords, I'll really recommend you to check out this section on JPA in the appendix. Now I'll open up the application.properties And over here, what I want to do is I would want to add in a few more things. What I would want to do is I'll want to be able to see the SQL which is being generated. So what I'll do is spring.jpa.showSQL is equal to true. The other thing I would want to enable is something called h2 console. So what I'll do is spring.h2 console.enabled is equal to true. So make sure that you have both these settings enabled before you restart the application. So start the application now and you'd see that it launches up and there is some new information which would be printed in the startup log. Cool. You'd see that a table is being created to do and a sequence is being created called Hibernate sequence. Now you might be wondering, how can I check the data in this table? This is an in-memory database. The way you can do that is by going to a URI localhost 8080/h2-console. So if you go to that specific URL, you would see a page like this. One of the important things to make sure is the database URL. It should be JDBC h2 mem testdb. This is a common mistake. Sometimes the default value which comes up is a little different from this. Make sure that you edit it and have JDBC h2 mem testdb as it is shown in here. Once you have that, you can click connect. And over here, you see the to-do table. And if you do a select star from to-do, you see that there is no data in here. Let's quickly populate some data in here. The way you can populate data is by adding a new file in here, Control N, new SQL file. If you don't see a new SQL file coming up, the other approach would be Control N, create a new text document, and you can save it as data.sql into this specific thing. So what I'll do is new SQL file and I'll call this data.sql. The important thing is which folder I'm saving it to. It should be in source main resources. So let's click finish, and over here I would want to populate data into the to-do table. Let's get the todo.java class so that we have that as a reference. So we would want to enter data into this specific table. Insert into to-do, and I would specify the column names. So let's specify the column names, which are ID, username, description, target date. Username, description, target date would be target underscore date. So if you have something in camel case in here, so D is a caps. So in the database, typically what we would do is use underscore. JP understands that in the bean you would have target date, and on the database the naming convention is to have target underscore date. So the table would be created with target underscore date, and is done would be is underscore done. So what values do I want to populate into this? Values, the ID, I would want to start with a large ID value. The sequence over here typically starts with 1 and I don't want to conflict with it. That's the reason why I would use a large starting value for the IDs. For the data which we insert in, the username is in 28 minutes. Make sure that you are using single quotes. Double quotes are not really allowed in here. And I'll say learn JPA. And the target date is sysdate. And is done is false. Now put a semicolon in here to separate the inserts, and you can insert multiple to-dos in. So I'll need to change the IDs. Typically one of the mistakes a lot of people do is not change the IDs. If you don't change the IDs, then it would throw a identity exception because you cannot have two rows with the same ID. Username would remain the same. Learn JPA. Let's say learn data JPA and learn microservices. Cool. Now we have the data. Let's save this and let's wait for the application to start and pick it up. Now if you go to the H2 console and click run, it would actually take you back because the server has restarted. Now you select to do again and click run, and now you would see that the data is populated. In this quick step, we made the to-do object an entity. So now this is being managed by JPA, and we populated some data for it, and we were able to see all this stuff in H2 console. If you have any questions about what's happening, how is all this working so easily, do check out the section in the appendix on JPA. I'll see you in the next step. Until then, bye bye.